to Practicing Talking episode 169. Friday idealism, but I'm looking at the worst case scenario today. Like some of these pieces I cut down heavily, but the third guy, I just let him talk because last time I took note, he's so harsh. Talking about the Como Harp, that's a military base in Alaska.
There's often this talk about consensus or non-consensus among scientists, especially in American media. How would you characterize the debate or non-debate among scientists? Is there any debate about global warming?
So that's a great question because there is this huge gulf, first of all, between where sort of scientists stand on the basic question, is global warming happening? Is it caused by human activity? There's anywhere from a 97 to a 99% consensus among scientists publishing in the peer-reviewed scientific literature that global warming is real and it's caused by human activity. So that isn't something that's seriously debated in the scientific literature. It isn't something that's seriously debated at scientific meetings. And yet the public continues to have this perception that scientists are somewhat divided on those questions, in part because there has been a massive, very well-funded, very organized misinformation campaign by certain fossil fuel interests, those who don't want to see us regulate carbon emissions, those who profit tremendously right now from the unregulated burning of fossil fuels. They have, in many cases, sought to stymie efforts to introduce policies to deal with this problem here in the U.S. And they have engaged in a massive disinformation campaign, really, to try to fool the public, the American public, into thinking that there isn't a scientific consensus. It's very much like what was done by the tobacco industry decades ago when faced with the prospect of the public learning of the very negative health impacts of their product. In fact, some of the same paid advocates who were advocating for tobacco interests in the 1980s are now advocating for fossil fuel interests in trying to discredit the mainstream science of climate change, in trying to undermine the public's understanding of that science. But the fact is that scientists are debating a number of very interesting questions. We're not debating whether global warming is real or caused by human activity. That bus left the station, more than a decade ago. That doesn't mean that we've answered all the interesting questions. There are wide open questions that have implications for policy, for adaptation, for example. How much worse will Atlantic hurricanes get? We don't yet have a firm answer to that question. How bad will drought in California get over the next couple decades? Again, there's some spread in scientific thinking on that issue. So when you get down into some of the details, precisely how much will the globe warm as a result of ongoing burning of fossil fuels and ongoing increases in greenhouse gas concentrations? There are a range of estimates because there are uncertainties in some of the physical processes that are involved, like the role that clouds might play. That turns out to be a pretty difficult problem because clouds are really small. The global climate models we use are really big, and so it can be difficult to represent clouds as accurately as we might like to in some of these models, and different physical assumptions about the role that clouds play therefore lead to somewhat different estimates of how much warming we'll see. But you can take all of that scientific uncertainty that exists, and it cuts both ways. Yes, certain projected impacts could perhaps be less than the models currently predict, but other impacts could be far worse. And the evidence that's come in over the last decade or so seems to be weighing in many respects, on the side of the models actually understating the rate at which things are happening. The models haven't been capturing the rate at which we are losing Arctic sea ice in the summer. The models have underpredicted the rate at which the ice sheets will continue to melt. The climate models predicted that we wouldn't see a loss of ice from the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets for many decades to come, but the satellites are measuring that loss already. It's already happening decades ahead of schedule. And there are many such examples. So it turns out uncertainty, while it exists and while it drives a lot of the research, we don't keep on researching questions that have been more or less answered. What drives researchers are answering the questions that remain open. But it turns out that the uncertainty that remains because of those open questions could well mean that climate change ends up being even worse than we currently project. And so it is not, by any stretch of the imagination, a cause for complacency or an argument for inaction. If anything, uncertainty is an argument for taking even greater action because of the potential outcome where the changes end up being far worse than we currently estimate.
Hello, I'm Paul Beckwith. I'm with the University of Ottawa Laboratory for Paleoclimatology. I'm also with Carleton University, the Department of Geography and Environmental Sciences. What I'm talking about in this particular video and a subsequent series of videos is a very recent paper that has just come out by the U.S. Geological Survey, the USGS, that it's a review paper. It looks at all the literature on methane, and it tries to assess the risk of methane, a large burst of methane coming up from the sea floor in the Arctic, into the atmosphere, and causing, extreme problems to society. I'm talking about a large pulse or a large burst of methane. So science cannot say that it will not happen. Science cannot say that it will happen at a particular time. It can only look at all of the processes that are involved and try to assess the risk of this happening. So there's certainly no scientific evidence that would suggest or prove that we're going to have a 50 gigaton burst of methane within the next 10 years, say, even given all of this rapid warming in the Arctic, and that will, basically end civilization, even lead to what a large following of people are talking about being near-term human extinction. The evidence is just not there. The evidence is not solid to suggest that, and this paper goes a long way into assessing all of the processes and allows one to say that. That's not to say that we're not in a dire climate change situation, a situation of rapid and abrupt climate change that will lead to complete loss of sea ice and snow cover in the Arctic and large melt of ice from Greenland, etc., causing accelerated rise in sea level. We definitely have a climate change emergency situation. So the question is, will methane basically accelerate that greatly, or will it not? So I'm basically trying to give the message of this particular paper. It just came out yesterday, so it needs obviously careful analysis, but I'm throwing what I've learned from this paper out to you. So
okay, now this is going to be a very frightening video, and I would sincerely ask you, if you're prone to depression, don't watch this. But if you want to know what's going to be happening to our planet, then you can sit through this video. But seriously, if you have mental health issues, don't watch this. This can be too much even for a healthy person to deal with. Okay, this is November of 2013, just this fall, and we can see this is NASA. NASA has published this. This is the temperature anomaly. These are temperature anomalies in centigrade. So this is the abnormal stuff compared to 1950 to 1980. And we can see Alaska because of the fake polar vortex created by the Gakona HAARP, was really warm. It was something like 2 degrees centigrade above normal. In fact, the entire Arctic was far above normal, roughly 2 degrees, looking at their color scale. So the importance of that is, we come to this next graph. Okay, for some reason NOAA deliberately did not look at the Arctic. What a joke. Ocean temperature anomalies, but they don't look at the Arctic. What a joke. Okay, now this is awfully big. Let me zoom out a little. This is the graph that you've got to understand how deadly HAARP is for planet Earth. And we're going to look, first we'll look at the scale, okay? The blue is the actual measured data going back to 1800s. The red diamonds are the measured temperature in the Arctic, okay? It's kind of bouncing all over the place. And the white is kind of the runaway global warming. This is a mathematical possibility, okay? A polynomial curve fit for the data. And the blue is actual IPCC polynomial. In other words, a projection that the best scientists have come up with. Okay, so let's focus down here. We can see, I hope you can read the, oh, there we go. In 2000, things were still, the Arctic's heating up a bunch, but this white curve is just kind of buried inside that Arctic data. Now let's step to 2004. Each one of these vertical lines is 4 years. 2004, the Arctic continues to heat pretty aggressively, but the global temperature is stable. Nobody's getting alarmed, but the Arctic temperature is really going up fast. 2008, lots of noise in the Arctic signal, but now we have enough data to actually do a curve fit, and that's what they've done with the white line. But you can see the global temperature is still just, it's increasing, but it's pretty flat. Okay, 2012. The Arctic temperature is continuing to go up, and global temperature is still kind of flat, although it is increasing. 2014, this is where we're at now. And this Arctic data that I just showed you showed the Arctic is now, what, 2 degrees centigrade. So it's going to be basically at this line here. So if we look at this line here, we're going to be right at this 2, or maybe a little bit above it. So let's look at 2016. This is the present. And the thing is, we can start seeing this. Okay, I'm sorry, I said that this was the runaway temperature. No, that's just the Arctic. That's the Arctic temperature. I'm sorry. This white line here is the potential runaway global warming temperature. And we can see right now it is starting to depart from the IPCC mathematical model because the IPCC does not include the Arctic methane in their models, or the fact that as the Arctic warms, more methane is released. As more methane is released, the Arctic warms more, etc., etc. It feeds on itself, accelerates. So let's look now at 2016. 2016, now we see the global runaway temperature is actually separated from the IPCC estimate. And the Arctic temperature is now accelerating rapidly because of the methane. 2018, oh, this is 2020. So this is only 6 years away. We now see the runaway global temperature curve starting to go up steeply. 2024. Now these curves have taken on a life of their own. They're unstoppable. By this point in the Arctic warming, the methane is now venting freely from the shallow Laptev Sea, and this is probably going to go even steeper at this point. And as the methane increases, so will the global temperature. 2028. At this point, the globe has now warmed 3.5 degrees centigrade from 1980. And the majority of mankind is dying. It's just not possible to survive for the majority of mankind. So, 2028 is, 14 years from now? 14 years from now, the majority of mankind is dying. Entire countries, and the oceans are now going anaerobic, heating extremely fast. And that's the actual death sentence for planet Earth. When the oceans go anaerobic, then they start to produce hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is a heavy gas. It's more toxic than cyanide gas. So these low-lying communities, downwind of bodies of water, they'll just have millions of people die overnight because of this hydrogen sulfide gas, H2S, which is many times more dangerous than cyanide gas. Okay, 2032. These curves are now unstoppable. The vast majority of mankind is dead. In fact, anybody living at the mid-latitudes is now dead. It's impossible to survive. The global heating has gone up 5 degrees centigrade. The mid-latitudes, everything's dead. And yet the Arctic is just now. Okay, now the Arctic has fully vented its methane. But now the permafrost, the 24% of all land mass on planet Earth is permafrost. The permafrost is now melting, venting enormous, unbelievable amounts of carbon dioxide and methane. So the 5 gigatons has increased. 5 gigatons from the shallow Laptev Sea in the Arctic has increased the methane content in the atmosphere by 1,000-fold in only, 20 years. 1,000 times increase. But now the permafrost is dumping huge, bigger amounts, and other areas of the ocean are venting the methane hydrates, methane clathrate. So now we go to, 2036. Mankind is dead at this point. There'll be a very few tiny settlements that are living underground that are still alive. But the Arctic temperature has increased about 9 degrees centigrade. And the global temperature is up 7 degrees centigrade. And now 2040, which is only 26 years from now. Even the underground settlements of human beings are just struggling. The global temperature is up 10 degrees centigrade. This has not occurred on Earth for 55 million years. And back when that did happen, 95% of all living things perished. There's falling oxygen levels since the oceans are dead, and they're sucking down oxygen rather than producing it. There are no oxygen producers on planet Earth, except for some algae at the poles, some plankton blooms at the poles, but even those are in jeopardy. So by 2040, mankind is extinct, and planet Earth is dead. And this is the best, the only prediction that takes into account the Arctic methane release and the positive feedback from the Arctic methane release. And this is the end of mankind. And, you know, this is not conjecture. This is what's actually happening. Now, I should mention one thing here is that as global temperature departs from the IPCC predictions, somewhere in here, the late 2010s, there will be a concerted effort to blow up one or more supervolcanoes, because that at that point, that is the only thing that can save planet Earth. The only thing is by going into a deep freeze for a couple of decades that will refreeze the Arctic. Okay, so that means the United States is dead. Southeast Asia, wherever they blow up the other supervolcano, is dead. That's very, very likely that the largest nuclear weapons that can be shoved down a borehole will be attempting to set off the supervolcanoes. It sounds like science fiction. I assure you, this is going to happen. This is happening now. The other thing I've got to point out is, what is it? You know, once this runaway temperature starts, it's too late, right? So let's back up. Well, we're actually right. 2008, 12. We're actually right here. We are right here. So once those lines separate, it's too late. But what caused the Arctic to heat up so much? You know, going back to, say right about here. What's this? 1996. Well, HAARP was built in the 80s. The Gakona HAARP was actually installed about here and started heating the Arctic by creating artificial high pressure west of California. And you can see what it's done. The Arctic is heating 6 times faster than the rest of the planet because of the Gakona HAARP. This Gakona HAARP is going to kill planet Earth in 25 years, with most humans being dead in about 10 years. Okay? This is what I've been saying in the other videos, and I should have shown this one first so people could take it seriously. But I challenge anyone to prove that this data is not correct. Even IPCC has admitted that they don't include this positive feedback data. They don't include methane release in their models, because if they did, it would be too frightening. So this is why people like Al Gore and real scientists are running around with their hair on fire. They're trying to warn people about this runaway global temperature without scaring the crap out of everybody. Well, I'm sorry, it's time to have the crap scared out of us, because it's the HAARP, it's the Gakona HAARP that is triggering the Arctic temperature increase at such an incredible pace, and I think it will be even faster than that. Once we can shut down that Gakona HAARP, then this process can be possibly reversed or tamed. But the Gakona HAARP has taken a century. We should have had 100 years to deal with these problems before the Arctic started heating like it has. And the Gakona HAARP has taken away that century that we needed to develop the technologies. But one thing I can guarantee you is that in the summertime of 2014, you won't see hardly any chemtrailing. No. The chemtrail planes are in the Arctic, trying to keep the Arctic from melting. So on one hand, the secret government is trying to stop the Arctic from melting, while another group in the secret government is running the HAARP to make sure that it melts as fast as possible. This is a clue as to who's actually running things. And more than that I cannot say. But I hope that you can look at this graph and realize that mankind is fighting for our lives right now, for the lives of all future generations. And this HAARP thing in Gakona, if we don't shut it down immediately, then the Arctic methane starts melting on its own and going pure vertical. The temperature goes pure vertical. And then once that begins, the best we can hope for is a Yellowstone. A successful Yellowstone super volcano eruption. And that's a big old secret, but now you know. This whole chart, this is the most important chart in mankind's history. And I'm telling you, we are not responsible for this. Carbon dioxide is not a horrendous gas. But once we start chemtrailing and harping so that Mother Nature cannot grow the plants to sequester that carbon in the soil, then you have runaway global warming. But that is being done to us by elements of this secret government. Okay? So you chemtrail pilots up there, you're going to be cruising over the Arctic Circle all summer. And you know, because you did it last summer. And it did. It helped spread the Arctic ice extent was more, even though the volume was less. But you need to know that what you're doing is probably going to help, but what's the point? This HAARP transmitter is far more powerful because it controls these low pressures that they can just push these giant low pressures into the Arctic, break up all that ice you helped make, and make sure that the sunlight penetrates into that dark water to heat the water itself. Okay, folks, this is a real bummer making this video for me. I hope that you can take this to heart and do whatever you can to spread the news about the Arctic methane and the fact that the HAARP is being used to kill planet Earth. Okay, thank you.